All right, so Zeplin's got a bunch of new capabilities that we're excited to talk about today, but you don't want to hear that from me. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to the real expert, Berk.
Thanks, Elliot. Yes, hey everyone. Happy to see you all here, so many people. So today I'm super excited to talk about sort of, I guess, the fundamentals of Zeppelin. We're going to talk about some of the best practices that we recommend teams that we talk to, sort of the ideal Zeppelin workflow, if you will. And I'm sure this will be helpful for both teams that are just getting started, and there's a lot of people joining us recently, which we will talk about in a bit. And it should also be helpful for sort of expert Zeppeliners, because we're going to talk about a lot of tips and tricks and, like I said, some best practices. And recently, there's been a lot of, I guess, kind of noise in the design to development handoff space. And as you can guess, that's mainly due to Figma announcing dev mode. And a lot of people are curious about how we think about this space, since we've been doing this for a long time now. So we will talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, let us know in the chat if you're here specifically because you're curious about the differences between Zeppelin and dev mode. It's a hot topic right now for us.
Yeah, for sure. That is a big question. So yeah, I guess let's sort of get started by talking about that. What is kind of the difference between Zeppelin and dev mode, in a sense, or any other sort of handoff solution that's out there? Well, since we started back in 2015, the main sort of challenge that we were trying to solve was, how do you go from design to code? And the very first thing that we try to focus on is, like, how do we generate specs from these designs? So you go in, click on a layer, and Zeppelin gives you all the specs, generates some code snippets, gives you some assets. Those are sort of the basics of what you would need when you want to translate a design to code. And then over the years, we've added a bunch more on top of that, things like integrations with Jira and Storybook and things like that. And we could kind of consider this as the core of handoff. That's what we call handoff. And what we kind of realized as we were talking to our users over the years is that this is kind of just one part of the larger delivery process, going from design to development. So we have kind of expanded Zeppelin into becoming more like a workflow tool, in a sense, where we have a structured solutions for things like finalizing designs, organization, design documentation, versioning. And those are the type of things that we're going to talk about. So if you haven't used Zeppelin for a while now, I'm sure you'll be interested in sort of learning about those types of things. And those are sort of the main differences between tools like dev mode and Zeppelin today.
Yeah, and I think, before we get to that, I think it would be great to hear for everyone, and, myself again, is like the underlying philosophy of like why you build Zeppelin as one of the co-founders.
Yeah, like I said, in the beginning, it was mainly trying to figure out, like, how do we go from design to code? Designers were spending a bunch of time creating what we called like these red lines, and we wanted to solve that entirely. But over the years, that really kind of turned into more of a mission around, like, just how do we make that entire process simpler and sort of provide a more structured solution. Today, if you want to use Zeppelin for basic specs and handoff, that's great. You can totally do that. But there's a lot more that you can take advantage of. We basically encourage a workflow where you sort of designers get more ownership on what they share and what they don't. There's a clear layer of organization where designs are much more accessible. There's clear communication about which design is in progress, which one's approved, which one's still waiting for review. And design changes are a big thing. Like, whenever you make a change, you want to make sure that's communicated clearly. That's another thing that we want to solve in a much more structured and systematic way. Another thing that's pretty crucial is design documentation. What's really interesting is that all of these things I mentioned are somewhat doable in any design tool if you want to do that. But what we kind of we kind of provide almost like a purpose-built solution for these. So when you use Zeplin, you will realize that all of these things I've mentioned have now you have a clear workflow that everyone in the team uses. So these things are really based on kind of our learnings over the years as we were talking to lots of teams. And what we did last year actually was the things that we've learned about going from design to development, we kind of codified those into 7 principles. And that's something that we were initially using internally, and then we also published it on our website. Let me actually share my screen so I can show that right away. Switch over to our website. So if you go into our website now and click on principles, you will see kind of how we think about design delivery. These are kind of the principles that we kind of live by at Zeplin. So whenever we're building something new, these are things that we kind of always go back and think about. Today, we're going to cover sort of the first 4 or 5 of these, because I'm thinking that's how much time we have for today. And that should give you a lot of ideas around, like, you know, what Zeplin's all about. I guess we can dive in, right, Elliot?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up my slides. I have a bunch of things open right now because I want to make sure that this is kind of more interactive. I have Zeplin open here, and I have some designs over here, so I can sort of show you both sort of the basics and also the best practices of these sort of principles that we talked about. So, okay, before we sort of dive in, these are the 4 topics that we're going to talk about today. These are the most common sort of questions we get from new Zeplin users. And I will try to, like I said, share some of the basics and also some more tips around how to do all of these things. First, we're going to talk about when you should move your designs over to Zeplin. This might seem like a simple question, but there's actually a lot of thought that goes behind this. And there are 2 main ways of doing this, and that's what we're going to talk about. Then we're going to move over to how to organize your designs in Zeplin. This is, you know, again, one of those common questions that we get because there's a bunch of layers to this. So we're going to talk about all of those. Then we're going to talk about design versioning, which is, like I said, kind of a crucial thing to get right. And then finally, we're going to talk about documenting designs. So let's kick it off by the first topic. When do you publish your designs over to Zeplin? This actually there's 2 main ways of doing this. As we were talking to our users over the years, these are kind of, obviously there's more, but these are the 2 common ways of doing this. Internally at Zeplin, we fall into the second camp, but I guess more frequently when people are when some of the designs are ready, let's say you're working in Figma and you have a design that's sort of finalized, decided on, and it's ready to be developed. A lot of people, that's when they publish their designs over to Zeplin. And that kind of gives you, I mean, by nature, Zeplin is a separate place, right? So whenever you publish your designs, you get all the benefits of that separation. So let me actually quickly show you how this works. So when you're, let me pull up Figma. So I have some designs over, let's pretend that these are ready to be developed. And I have my project over here in Zeplin. What's nice about this is that this is kind of a copy of one of these designs in here. And I can go in and actually start changing it. And obviously the design here is not going to change. And, you know, by nature, this is kind of how we think about the whole idea of separation. This kind of gives you a kind of a Git-like workflow where you have your local environment as a designer where you can sort of free to do whatever you want. More designers can come in and you can collaborate, but until you're ready, they're not going to be published over to Zeplin. So just to quickly show you how you would publish a design, right now we have a plugin in Figma that you can run. This works in pretty much all the design tools the same way. You select a design, you click export, and then you pick the project that you want to export to. This one's This one I have in background is called checkout, and designs just come in. This is kind of how it works. You can, again, I think I will multiple times talk about this Git-like workflow. You can think of this as almost like making a commit of your design over to Zeplin. And then once it's in here, you can organize them and move into different sections. So you can move this over to this payment section here. And yeah, this is kind of how things get moved into Zeplin. Well, this is sort of the basics. And when you do this, I guess if you're in this first camp, any design that lives in Zeplin is a kind of an indication to developers that these are ready to be built. But let's talk a little bit about the second approach, which we use internally at Zeplin while we use Zeplin. And a lot of companies like agencies also tend to use this approach too, which this is what we call 360 feedback. What usually happens is whenever you're in Figma or in any design tool that you use, a lot of the collaboration that happens in there is earlier in the design stages where you're doing a bunch of explorations. Lots of people come in, maybe your PM, even your developers. That's totally fine, and that's where those conversations should happen. But once a design is almost ready to be built, you kind of made the decision on which exploration to go with. There is a need to sort of bring in a larger group of people and have them also contribute and leave feedback. And this could be challenging for some teams to do in the design tool. So a common way of using Zeplin as well is that you publish your designs over when they are ready for this 360 feedback. And we have a couple of features in Zeplin that also simplifies this too. We will talk a little bit about these when we get to organization, but these we actually have ways of tagging your designs and marking them for different use cases. So in this case, I believe this screen that I have is waiting for approval from Anne. This is again kind of a built-in feature where you can click into a design and request a review from someone in your team. And this is kind of whenever you do, this design is actually marked as pending approval, so you can quickly get to these designs. And this really gives you a way of still providing this accessible workspace where designs are much more neatly organized. And once things get approved, you move them over to ready for dev. And that's when developers would sort of be able to start building these things. This is another sort of common way of using Zeplin. This is totally up to you. But like I said, this is how we tackle things at Zeplin. But a simpler way to get started could just be when things are ready for development.
Yeah, Berk, I don't know if you saw the chat, but Taylor messaged to us that they'd love to hear kind of like as you go through these areas, how they differ to the Figma dev mode workflow. I know obviously like separation is like kind of self-explanatory. It's not in Figma is like a big thing. But yeah, just something to think about as you go through. Also, real quick to the chat, just to echo Josh's message, make sure that you set your chat to everyone right above the text field when you're typing. I know a lot of you were announcing your locations, but I think only me and Berk were able to see it. So just to make sure everyone can see what everyone's saying.
I guess to answer Taylor's question, for this specific part, maybe one thing that we could compare this with is the ready for dev tag that's in Figma, which is another way of sort of marking something as this is ready to be built. I guess one thing that's tricky is that even when you do this in Figma, you kind of lose the version control that we're going to talk about a little bit. So I think when we get there, that's going to be more clear. But moving something to Zeplin is actually sort of a bigger, maybe more like a bigger commitment or a more intentional move that you do. And that really gives you more control over sort of the versions that you will have in Zeplin 2. So I think this is going to be more clear when we get to versioning. But yeah, I'll try to keep that in mind. And as we talk through these, I can mention how they differ. Alrighty, I guess we can continue. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is design organization. This is something people new to Zeplin, this is something that people might get confused by, because there's actually lots of levels to how we do this. And over the years, this has really evolved. So if you haven't used Zeplin in a while, I think this will also be helpful. I'm going to start this off by sort of showing you this sort of hierarchy first. We have, I guess, these sort of 5 main levels of organization in Zeplin. The very first level is what we call a workspace. And if I go back here in Zeplin, this is my workspace. We're kind of looking at a fake workspace of a company called Snack Overflow, with the vision of saving humanity and providing everyone the snacks that they need. So this is kind of basically the top level organizational element here. And within this workspace, everything that's related to Snack Overflow, that's where it lives. And if we go one level below, there are what we call sections within the workspace. And you can see that this here, we have the user portal and the shop portal. This is essentially a way for sort of different teams in your company to organize things. So in this case, the way I've organized this is within Slack Overflow, I'm imagining there is kind of a user portal where this is all related to all the apps and any sort of websites that the users interact with. And then we have our shops, our snack shops that it's where they manage their inventory, where they track orders. So those could be under this shop portal section. This is totally up to you to organize, but this is a very common way of doing this. So every sort of, I guess, pod or team or lane that you have in your sort of larger team, this is where you can use these sections to separate that sort of responsibility. And if your company is obviously larger than Snack Overflow here, then we've also seen people do a workspace for each pod. That's also a possibility, but depending on the size of your company, you can sort of start here, and then if you want to expand to having multiple workspaces, you can do that. Then the next level of organization is projects. This is kind of the first thing that you do when you come into Zeplin. We ask you to create a project, and sometimes people ask me like, what does a project mean? Like, how is that like a file in Figma, or is it a project in Figma? Again, this is very sort of flexible, and you can sort of use it however you want. But the way we recommend people use projects is almost like you can think of each project as a feature or a task that a set of people work on, and this could be like an epic in Jira. So it lets you create a separate place where you collect a bunch of designs. You have individual tags. You have individual members that are related, that is related to that epic. All integrations and things like that. So that's a sort of a common way of thinking about it. If you have a feature or an epic or whatever you want to call it that you're working on, it's usually ideal to create a new project for that. I've seen a lot of people have this one project that's kind of like a massive project with hundreds and thousands of screens. That is doable, but that's obviously not something we recommend, because ideally having separate projects is going to be much more helpful in terms of what types of notifications you get and things like that. So yeah, if you think of projects as the epic, then whenever we click into these projects, you will see also you'll notice some sections in here as well. They're sort of indicated by this bar here. You can actually collapse these. So right now we have 2 sections in this project, and you can think of each of these sections as like a story of that is a part of this epic. So it's almost like a think of like a sub feature. So in this case, we're working on checkout with these lovely people. And in this checkout epic, we have two stories. One would be payment that certain people would work on. And then next up, we will tackle, tracking deliveries. Again, this is very flexible and you don't have to do it this way, but this is a very common way of using it. Another common way of using sections here is instead of naming them by the sub feature, you can also name them by your sprints. This could be like, the April 10 sprint. And that's, again, kind of totally up to you. But then you can have these separate sections that you look at every other week. So whenever a developer comes in, they can sort of find the thing that they need to work on right away. And the next level is screens. So each of these items here represent one or more designs in Figma. That sort of comes with what we call comes through what we call screen variants feature, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. Yeah, let's actually click into one of these and look at what a screen is. So what this is essentially is a frame in Figma that I published. I can try to find that in here. Let's see. Yes, there we go. This is the shopping cart screen. So in this case, you can see, let me close that. We have the shopping cart screen, but it actually has multiple states. And this is the way you would organize things in a design file, which makes total sense because you want to have these as separate items and you want to work on them separately. But as we were thinking about, like, what's the best way to present this to developers and sort of the rest of the team in a more organized way? And that's where the idea of screen variants came up. So you'll notice in Zeplin that those three frames are represented as these variants up here. Since these variants are all related to the same screen, that's why they're sort of grouped. The way you can do this is you can either do it in Figma even before you publish, or you can group the designs in Zeplin as well. So one way of doing it is, these two screens look like variants of each other as well. So you can click, drag and drop it on the screen, which would make those two a variant group. But another way that we feel like it's going to make it a lot simpler is by using a naming convention in Figma. Here you'll notice that each of these screens are called shopping cart, and then this is the default, this is the remove, and this is the confirm variant. In this case, we use this convention, which is -v. So what Zeplin does is, in this case, all the screens that are named shopping cart -v would fall under the shopping cart variant, and these default remove and confirm would be these variant names. There's again lots of different ways of using this feature. A lot of people use it for these types of variants where maybe you have a loading state or an error state. But you could also use it for things like desktop, tablet, and mobile versions of the same screen. Or you could use it for light mode and dark mode of the same screen. It really depends on what's more important to you. That would be represented as the variant, and then then other states would live as separate screens in the dashboard here. That's variants. And one final thing I wanted to talk about, maybe then we can get a couple more questions, is tags. All the things you see up here are tags, and they're not a way for you to like visually organize things, because that's what sections and variants are for. But tags are more for things like maybe, hey, you want to see all the screens that have an alert. Or you want to assign different screens to different people. Or like I said right before this, as I was talking about approvals, you want to see screens that are pending approval. This is what we use tags for. And tags are totally customizable. We have a few different tag groups, what we call. So you can have assigned members. Maybe you have a designer and a developer that's assigned to different screens, so you could do that. You can do status tags as well. Or you can sort of do any sort of free form tag that you want to create. In this case, an example here I have is these cycles. So you can organize the designs into which cycle that they're going to be worked on. So this is another sort of way of organizing designs that makes things easier to get to. Let me see if we have anything in chat. I think we're okay, right?
Yeah, looks good.
Maybe one final thing I can talk about as we're talking about organization is another common challenge that we've heard people have is that it might be really tricky to find a screen that you're working on that you need to work on if you have this big workspace with lots of designs. We have introduced a way for you to quickly get to a design by just simply searching for it. Usually searching within a project is something that you might be used to, but what you can do in Zeplin is actually you can search the entire workspace for a design that you're looking for. So maybe let's pick something here that maybe we're looking at this payment failure screen. You don't even have to be in the screen. You just do Command K and you can do payment, and then it would show you all the things that match. You can search for projects, sections. In this case, you can sort of get to this payment failure screen by just searching for it anywhere. This is also another neat thing that we do at Zeplin. Okay.
We've got two questions right now, Berk, but I think they're not specific to this section, so we can keep moving, and I'll make sure we cover them at the end.
Okay, let's get to those at the end. All right, so next up, we have design version control. Yes, this is also another topic that I'm personally pretty excited about. First, we're going to talk about how versioning is done usually in a design file. I guess, a lot of you are familiar with this, but versioning in design files, even if you haven't used a design file before, it kind of works similar to how, Google Docs or Dropbox Paper does it. It's like everything that you do, since there's live collaboration going on, everything that you do is tracked and then saved as a version occasionally. This is pretty helpful because imagine a use case where as a designer, you're like exploring different things. Maybe you have 3 explorations that are going on, and then you pick one that you want to continue with, but those other 2 they just stay there in your file. But you still want to have the history of like what happened, because in a case you might need to go back to it and refer that. So versioning in design files naturally really aligned with how designers work. So we were spending a lot of time thinking about like, okay, what is the best way to communicate these versions to developers and the rest of the team in a more intentional way. And like I said, I'm going to refer to Git again here. We took a lot of inspiration from how developers do versioning in Git. So we've tried to come up with a version that's kind of more tailored towards design and is obviously a more simplified version of it. But the way it works in Zeplin is that once these changes are happening, you commit your designs or publish your designs over to Zeplin in whenever you feel like you need to do it. And this really makes it more intentional, and therefore your versions in Zeplin are going to be much more self-explanatory. By just looking at all these commits, you can understand all the changes that are happening. So in this example here, you'll notice that Bran, our designer, is working on probably one of the screens, called it screen A, and there's a bunch of different explorations going on here. But once it's finally done, Bran makes the decision to publish the design to Zeplin. And this is where the version history of this individual screen actually starts. This is also one of the biggest differences between how versions in Zeplin work versus the versions in the design file, is that they're tracked per screen instead of versions for the entire file. And this is valuable uh, uh, for developers in a lot of different reasons. One being is that when you click into one of these designs, you only see that the changes that happened to that particular design. And with integrations like Slack as well, or Teams, whenever these publishes happen, these commits happen, we are able to notify everyone in the team. But if you try to do that in the design tool, it would be tricky to understand, like, okay, when is this exactly done? So we kind of give designers that intentional ability to publish and commit their designs. So if we continue looking at this list here, Anne comes in, they actually make changes to the same design. So once they're ready, they publish it again. So you can see the history of the screen A is kind of growing. And then screen B doesn't even exist at Zeplin at that point. Then whenever brand's ready, they make changes to screen B and then publish it. And that's kind of how it works. This is mainly how we tackle versioning in Zeplin. So if I pull up this this screen that we have here for in Zeplin, this is when you're in a screen, you can actually, let's zoom stuff over, sorry. When you click on this little panel down here, you will see that this is kind of the version history, and this is just the screen that I've published this morning, and it doesn't have any changes right now. So let's actually go back to Figma, make some changes and publish it so that you can see how this process works. All right, so the way you publish a version is exactly the same as publishing a design for the first time. You pull up the plugin, and once you click on one of the designs, you will notice that it actually prompts you to, like, oh yeah, you've actually published this before. So you can just re-export it to the same project. But if you don't want that, you can turn it off too. So I'm going to click on export, but before we do that, let's actually make a change. Maybe I want to sort of change all my buttons to have, instead of 12, 8 pixels of corner radius. Obviously, I would do this normally in the component, but for the sake of this demo, let's just do it here. I'm going to click export, and this just goes through that same process. And when we come back here, you'll notice we've actually have a new version. And what's nice about this is that without even leaving Figma, you can come in and add a commit message here, like a update corner radius. This is optional, but we highly recommend you do this because it's going to make things a lot easier to track. And like I said, whenever I do this action, there is an option to publish this to apps like Teams and Slack as well. So in that message, it will say, oh, Berk actually updated the corner radius of this screen. So it's kind of like an easy way to track what's happening. But another thing I want to show you is what we call version diff. This is kind of a more recent feature. A challenge that happened is that if you click into these designs, it's really difficult to see what's changed here. So for these types of cases specifically, we've built version diff. So you can click on this and enable version diff, and it'll give you this handy, oh, there's actually no new layers. One existing layer has changed and nothing has been removed. And the change is actually highlighted here. So whenever I click on it, you'll see a bunch of information about this component. But if you scroll down, you'll see that the radius is highlighted, and it shows you that it's changed. It's been changed from 12 to 8. So this is another sort of neat way of seeing exactly what has changed. It is especially useful when there are smaller changes like this that usually get missed.
Yeah, one thing I think that's super valuable is just like how intentional you can make your changes, that that graphic you showed, but this one right here, it's a lot. It's, you know, it can be hard for a designer who knows the design file to sift through and like remember what they changed. But for a developer who's not like living in this design file, it's even harder, right?
Right, right, yeah. And in order to tackle this, I've seen people do like separate pages in their design files to make sure that all these different versions are tracked manually. So like I said, a lot of these things are possible in the design tools, but the biggest, I think, difference between Zeplin and all the other design tools out there is the fact that we're bringing this sort of structured and intentional workflow for all of these use cases so that there's less chances of you know, someone missing something, or there's sort of a like an error somewhere. So it's just everything's much more smoothly done in this sort of workflow.
Right, right. You know, even like a lot of the workarounds that we've seen as well, like the copy and paste, even if you create like a whole like another copy of a screen, that erases that it becomes its own new version, right? So at that point, like version history just becomes so messy. And when you're talking like versions on versions of screens on screens, you're just growing exponentially, like the size
Yes,
of your design file.
yes, exactly. And maybe one final thing I can mention, because it's also another common question we get, is sometimes what you do is you can actually duplicate this frame and maybe work on some changes here, and then these are now separate frames. Like, what's going to happen if I publish this again to Zeplin? We've actually, by default, Zeppelin actually looks at the names of the designs, and that's how we match them. So if you were to like duplicate this screen like 100 times, you can still publish it, and it will replace the existing screen and add it as a version, as long as the name is the same. If you don't want to do that, though, there's also an option within the plugin here where instead of updating screens by name, you can actually pick corresponding frame. Then what it does is it actually looks at sort of the underlying ID of the frame, and that's how we match them. But in that case, you want to make sure if you duplicate them, that would be a separate separate screen in Zeplin too. So if you want to make sure things get updated by name, make sure this one's selected, which is, I think it is the default. All right. Should we move on to the
Yeah,
documentation?
let's keep moving. Yeah, we can, there's a few more questions, but we can make sure we get to them after everything's good.
Okay. All right. And finally, we're going to talk about design documentation. And what we mean by design documentation is essentially communicating the intent of the design. It's usually not enough to just share the design itself. You have to provide additional information to the developer to make sure that things get implemented properly and your intent is communicated properly. So we have built a few different features that live in this documentation world. The first one is what we call annotations. Annotations are actually a way for you to add little notes on top of the design, which I can show you instead of looking at the slide. Let's actually look at an example here. So we have a search result screen here. In fact, this is the default state, so nothing's been searched yet. Then you can use variants too. Anyways, we've talked about that already. In this example, you can see that right away these annotations pop up. And this is our way of solving the challenge of usually this type of information lives somewhere else. You know, maybe a PM has some of these requirements here that they have documented there in Confluence or Jira somewhere, which is helpful. But when we were thinking about sort of a usual workflow developer, we were thinking, why don't we bring everything into Zeplin so that just by looking at the design, you have everything you need to start building this. So a common use cases for using these annotations is just adding requirements on top of the design. So in this case, let's say you click search and then you have these recent searches here right before you search. And then it gives you some requirements around like, oh yeah, you know, display 3 most frequent searches done in the last week. These recent searches should be stored locally on the device. Like I said, this is probably something that either a PM or a tech lead would provide, but instead of it living somewhere else, it just lives right on top of the designs. Or another common use case for this is just more for design behavior. And a common way I've seen a lot of designers do this is just by adding separate layers right next to the designs. So instead of doing that, you could actually do that right within Zeplin. So in this example, it just says that whenever you navigate into the screen, the search bar should be focused right away. Another really interesting use case that came up as we were building annotations is more related to maybe backend developers who want to provide the API endpoints that the front-end dev should be using. So in this case, we have them coming in and adding an annotation about, oh, here if you want to fetch the suggested searches, use this endpoint, more information about it, and then you have a link to go to the actual API docs. So whenever the way you add an annotation, by the way, is very similar to adding a comment. You can use the button down here, or you can actually just command click anywhere on the screen. By default, it adds a comment, but you can toggle in here for annotations. And we have predefined annotation types here that most of our users have asked us for. And, we've even seen people do like tracking, they add tracking events on top of the designs. So you know what to track whenever you click on a button. So this is really sort of customizable depending on your use cases. The main difference between a comment and an annotation is that the annotations would be by default visible in this right panel. So even if you miss them, you will be able to see them right here on the left panel, on the right panel. Oh shoot, we are kind of running out of time, so I'm going to speed up.
We can 2x speed your talking.
So we're going to do flows next. And let's go back to the checkout project, which I have a nice flow up here. Move the zoom thing away. Okay, here we go. So the view that we've been looking at in a project is what we call the dashboard. This is where you see all the screens, all your tags. Another very sort of important view in a project is the flow view. So you can get to it from this tab here. And this is where you see sort of an overview of how all the designs in the project connect. What's really nice about this view is that these are actually the same exact designs that live in here. So if I click on this, I go into the detail page, you can sort of look at that same screen here. You can also double click it and take you to the same place. So these are actually the same designs. And like I showed you before, if you upload a new version of this design, it will also get updated here in this flow view. And what's nice about this is that we can kind of have a purpose-built feature to create these user flows. And we've looked at a bunch of examples of how people prepare these and built features that may make that easier. So in this case, we have the shopping cart, and we have this remove flow where you like sort of scroll the item, and then you have the remove button, and then that shows you an alert. So if you wanted to build a really simple flow for this, whenever you're dragging your cursor over all the items in the flow, you'll see these blue dots. So you can start dragging and connect it directly to the screen. And these connectors are live, so even if you move things around, they will stay connected. One thing that you can also do is connect an individual layer. In this case, I can connect this remove text to the screen here. And what's nice about this is if you update a new version, and then maybe, let's say this remove button is moved down here, the connector will actually move with that too. So that's also something that just makes these flows a lot easier to maintain. And we also have a couple more features here where you can add shapes and things for cases like this. Maybe you have a branching path. You can change the colors of these things. And another really feature that I'm a big fan of is what we call these placeholder screens. Let's say you have a path and a user flow. which is something that frequently happens. As you're building a user flow, that's when you realize, oh, wait, like, what do we do if the payment's not successful? So in those types of cases, you can add a placeholder like I did here. And these placeholders are meant to be updated whenever the design actually comes in. But these are like we have these nice templates that you can pick from until the actual design is ready. And when it's ready, you can sort of click in, and in this case, this is the payment failure, which is right here. So I can click on it, and then it replaces with the design I have in the dashboard. So again, you can think of flows as a different view of all the screens in your project. It is totally optional. You don't have to do it every time. In fact, I don't expect all features, all projects to have a flow, because sometimes you just have a pretty straightforward feature. It's just like one screen after another. So even by looking at them in this grid is, you can get how everything connects. But especially if there are branching paths like we have here, then this is where this feature becomes super helpful. And finally, I want to quickly show you the Jira integration. This is a great way to make sure that everything, any sort of documentation that lives even outside of Zeplin is connected to the designs. So we have a pretty deep integration with Jira where you can go into an issue and attach a specific design or a section. In this case, I've attached this payment section. So you will notice that you can actually see the Jira issue right here, and it says in review. You can click on it. You can see the, who is assigned to, priority, and all this stuff. This is literally like visible in Zeplin without you having to go back to Jira. But if you want to, you can click it and it will take you to Jira with all the sort of details of this issue. And what's really nice about it is that it's kind of a two-way integration. So you can also see the designs right here in Jira. You can sort of take a quick look here before you open it up in Zeplin. This is done by using our sort of Zeplin for Jira plugin for Jira. So if you use Jira, I highly recommend you install this so you can directly attach the designs instead of just pasting a link. Okay, I think this was pretty much it. Like I said in the beginning, we have actually two more principles that we wanted to talk about, but we unfortunately don't have enough time. And that has to do with how to manage your design system elements in Zeplin and make sure they get surfaced whenever someone's looking at a design. Just to quickly show you, whenever you actually click on something, click on a component in Zeplin, it gives you a bunch of information about what component it is, where it's coming from in your code base. You even have like some code snippets that are generated based on the component that lives in your code base. So maybe we can sort of talk about these in a separate session, but feel free to go into our website and sort of look at it right there. And then finally, we wanted to talk about all the sort of technical specs and assets that we generate for developers, because there's a lot of sort of tailored things that we do here, where these resources are generated based on what type of platform you use, or which size of desktop, mobile, tablet, those types of things. Okay, but before we go, I want to sort of do a sneak peek on a feature that's going to be related to this design system capability that I was talking about. So this is a feature that's been in works for a long time now. It was a pretty big challenge for us, but I'm really happy that it's finally getting there. We're hoping to sort of launch this in a few weeks, but it has to do with managing your style guide in Zeplin. So what a style guide is essentially, it is a place where you keep all of your colors and textiles and components in Zeplin. And what's been a pretty big challenge for a lot of people is to maintain these style guides, because let's say they already have a library in Figma. It could be difficult to just make sure, like, every time you make a change, you want to make sure that the style guide is also updated. So we built this feature where you can actually sync a Figma library directly with the style guide in Zeplin. So this is how you get started. You paste in the link of your Figma library, and then sort of Zeplin does this thing, and then pulls everything in to Zeplin. You can see here that it's sort of syncing all the components. And in the future, whenever you make a change and come back to Zeplin, you will see that, oh, there's actually an update. So you can sync those updates, and everything will sort of be kept up to date with your library in Figma. So this should hopefully make things a lot easier to maintain on Zeplin. Yeah, I think Elliot just posted in chat. We actually have a beta going on for this feature. So if you're interested in giving this a try, make sure to reach out to us, check out chat. I guess, yeah, I guess this is it.
Yeah, we can roll right into questions. We're a little short on time, but I want, everyone to know that we do get a copy of the chat and Q&A. So if you asked a question that doesn't get answered here, we will follow up. I'll make sure to get the answers from Berk, and we'll follow up with an email so everyone's questions end up getting answered in the end. Okay, real quick. This was a question kind of, back to like the beginning, when you talked about separation, from Brianna. You mentioned the benefits of separation when sharing designs in Zeplin versus in Figma. Can you explain what the benefits of separation are? This is not something that I've heard before.
Yeah, I think the if I want to summarize this really quickly, I think it's all has to do with you having control over what's being changed, what's been shared with developers and whoever you're sharing designs with. In the design tool, since it's really intended to be like a live collaborative space, which is great for like those earlier design iteration phases. But when it's actually when a design is finalized and someone's starting to work on it, and it's a whole separate way of collaborating, which is more like, which usually happens more async. The designer starts working on something else as the developer's working on the design that they worked on right before. So for that async collaboration, that's where the values of separation come in. You have this separate space where everything's committed, the designs are committed, and any changes that happen right after that, maybe you go in and you make a change in one of those finalized designs in Figma that might seem harmless, but those changes will probably get the developers are not going to be able to see that if they are really careful about checking all the versions and all the things that are happening in Figma. But this separation gives you sort of almost forces you to, like, whenever you make a change, you intentionally publish another version. So you're being very careful about every single change that you do, and then the fact that that's communicated clearly with the rest of the team as well.
Another question I think you might have a good answer for, specifically Berk, is this one from Oliver. It's a bit long, so I won't read the whole thing, but are there any future plans to extend the Storybook plugin integration?
Oh yeah, that's it's been a while since we worked on the Storybook integration, but that's exactly what I showed here for folks who don't know. Whenever you click on a component, it gets linked to the stories you have in Storybook, and we have this whole UI where you can map the stories to the components in Zeplin. And we're really hoping to, like, a big project that we're working on right now is a kind of an overhaul of the Zeplin UI. We're doing kind of this pretty big redesign project. So probably once we're done with that, that's one of those features that we can sort of go back to. There's definitely a lot of things that we can improve there.
Nice. Another question, what is Zeplin's place in Figma's versioning workflow? What are the strengths of Zeplin's versioning UX compared to Figma's? Would you use both or just Zeplin? We kind of touched on this as well.
Yes. Yeah. So as a quick summary, I think versioning in Figma is really great for, like I said, those design iterations. It keeps track of every single thing that you do, which is great. So because you can go back and refer to them later. But Zeplin's versioning is much more intentional, where you do your publishes and commits whenever you're ready. So all the things that are a simple example is maybe you're exploring a bunch of different things, and those are all tracked in Zeplin in Figma's version history, but you only want to commit the actual sort of final decision, the finalized design over to Zeplin. So everything that's happened in between doesn't really matter for the developer, so they don't get added as a version into Zeplin.
Okay, nice. And I want to wrap this up. We are pretty much at time, but Berk, I did have one thing that, I think is on a lot of people's minds. A big thing that came out, especially, at the end of January, was pricing.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yeah. So like, dev mode obviously has a price tag. And I think you had something special you might want to mention about Zeppelin.
Well, yeah, one thing that we've done is we've noticed that a lot of people, whenever dev mode launched, was kind of hesitant to pay for developers. We can understand why, but obviously, Zeppelin also charges for developers. That's kind of how we've worked since the beginning. But right now, if you check out our pricing page, you will notice that we have a campaign that's going on. So if you want to sign up before the end of March, you can get 20% off, which usually, even if you don't have this discount, I believe Zeppelin is going to be cheaper. But still with this discount, you can get almost like half the price of Figma dev mode. You can start using Zeppelin as well. And also I should mention, even if you don't want to pay for Zeppelin, that's totally fine. We have a pretty generous free plan where you can use one project with up to 6 people. And yeah, this will give you a sense of how everything works in Zeppelin. And if you really want to go bigger than that, that's when you can go ahead and subscribe to.
I wasn't going to do one more question, but that segues really good into this one. So are all of these features available on all Zeppelin plans? And then we'll get out of here.
Oh, like the differences between the plans?
Yeah, yeah.
I think the biggest difference is the number of projects that you get. In the free plan, you just have one, and in team you get 12, and then here you get unlimited. And then we also add a few more of these workflow features. Let's say like flows are limited up to some amount of project in here. Versioning, as you can see, like since we're storing all the versions, if you're on the free plan, you only get 30-day versioning. Then you get unlimited. And as you go up, you get more sort of features that are tailored to larger teams. At enterprise, you have all of your enterprise grade security features. Jira Server integration. Most companies use Jira Cloud, but really larger teams use Jira Server. So those types of things are available in the larger plans.
Awesome. Okay, we went a little over time, and thank you so much, everyone, for engaging. We had a lot more questions. Again, this recording will be emailed to everyone. We will get to all your questions. I'll make sure to get all the answers from Berk. I will follow up with an email. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to keep up with us, if you want to keep up with our events and talk to us more, I dropped links to the Discord, to our LinkedIn's, and to our events page in the chat. Thank you again, everyone, for showing up. I'm going to send those links one more time. And again, thank you. Everyone have a great day. Thanks, Berk.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Bye.